Hey there guys, today I wanted to give you 5 lessons that I learned from reading the book The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Now I read this book a little while ago, I took a lot of notes on it and learned a ton from it, and it actually helped me start to change a lot of my habits, which led to some pretty drastic changes in my life. So I wanted to share some of the most important things that I've learned from this book. And the first lesson is simply that all habits can be broken down into a 3-step process. Habits are triggered by cues, which then lead into a routine, and the routine ultimately culminates in a reward. One of the key things to note in this lesson is that habits are delicate things. They don't trigger unless the cue triggers them. So if you don't expose yourself to a cue, you're not going to do a habit. Now this is important for both good habits and bad habits. You need to build cues that trigger good habits, and you want to try to avoid cues that trigger the bad ones. Now speaking of cues that trigger habits, the second lesson I learned from this book that I want to share with you is that almost all cues fall into one of 5 different categories. They either fall into the category of location, time, emotional state, actions of other people, or the immediately preceding action. Knowing these 5 categories of cues is useful when you want to start changing bad habits because they'll allow you to pick out the cues of each individual specific habit that you're targeting. Now the third lesson that I learned from this book is that there's actually a 4th component to the habit loop. When I read the first chapter, it presented the first 3 parts of that loop, but then later on in the book you learn about the 4th one, which is craving. Through an experiment done on a monkey, scientists have been able to figure out that in the initial stages of building a habit, the brain receives a spike of activity, basically a dopamine surge, when the actual reward of the habit is achieved. However, as time goes on, and the habit is done over and over and over again and becomes more ingrained, the spike of activity starts to come before the routine is even gone through. It comes when the cue happens. And finally, the last lesson that I want to share from this book is that some habits have a tendency to spawn other habits, and these habits are called keystone habits. Essentially, keystone habits help to create small wins, which in turn boost your overall motivation and give you some momentum to build even more habits in your life. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on Thursday.